For decades, the World Cup has sold a simple dream. A football fan saves money for years. They travel across borders. They meet supporters from countries they may never visit again. They sing, celebrate, suffer, and experience football's biggest stage together. The World Cup was never just about the football. It was about the people who made the tournament feel alive. And that's why something unusual has started happening. Across multiple World Cups, and especially as attention turns toward 2026, a growing number of supporters have been asking uncomfortable questions about the future of football's biggest tournament. Questions about ticket prices. Questions about travel costs. Questions about accessibility. Questions about whether ordinary fans are slowly being pushed out of the very competition they helped build. What's interesting isn't that criticism exists. Every World Cup has faced criticism. What's interesting is that FIFA appears surprised by the intensity of the reaction. Because many of the decisions being questioned today were designed to make the World Cup bigger than ever. Yet for some supporters, bigger is beginning to feel very different from better. And that's where this story begins. Before we go any further, if you enjoy football documentaries that look beyond the scorelines and explore the bigger forces shaping the game, subscribe to the channel. Because this story isn't really about one tournament. It's about who the World Cup is ultimately for. For most of football history, attending a World Cup was never easy. The tournaments were expensive. Travel was complicated. Tickets were difficult to secure. But supporters generally accepted those challenges because the reward felt unique. The World Cup gathered the football world into a relatively concentrated space. Germany 2006 remains one of the clearest examples. Fans could move between cities efficiently. Supporters from different countries regularly crossed paths. Entire city centers became football festivals. The atmosphere became part of the tournament itself. Years later, many supporters still describe Germany 2006 not simply as a football competition, but as a shared cultural experience. That detail matters. Because when fans criticize modern tournament planning, they're often comparing it to memories like these. And that's where FIFA's biggest challenge begins. The organization's vision for growth increasingly collides with supporters' expectations of what a World Cup should feel like. The clearest example is World Cup 2026. For the first time in history, the tournament will feature 48 teams instead of 32. At first glance, that sounds like a football success story. More nations, more matches, more opportunities, more global representation. From FIFA's perspective, the expansion is easy to justify. Football is growing. New regions deserve opportunities. Additional matches generate revenue that can be reinvested into the sport worldwide. And there is truth in that argument. Many countries that previously struggled to qualify now have realistic chances of reaching the tournament. For emerging football nations, that's significant. But supporters immediately noticed another consequence. A larger tournament creates a much larger logistical challenge. The 2026 World Cup will stretch across the United States, Canada, and Mexico. The distances involved are enormous. A supporter could potentially face journeys of thousands of kilometers between matches. What was once a football trip starts looking more like a continental travel operation. And fans began asking a simple question. If the World Cup becomes harder and more expensive to follow, who exactly benefits? That's where the debate became more complicated. Because the concerns aren't only about distance. They're about cost. Airfares, accommodation, transport, food, match tickets. All of these expenses have increased significantly compared to previous eras. Supporters don't necessarily blame FIFA for global inflation. But many do question whether tournament planning adequately considers the realities facing ordinary fans. Think about the typical supporter. Not the celebrity. Not the corporate guest. Not the sponsor. The ordinary supporter. Someone taking annual leave from work. Someone saving for years. Someone traveling with family. For them, attending multiple matches increasingly feels like a luxury rather than a possibility. And once fans started noticing that trend, they began connecting it to a bigger concern. The growing commercialization of football. Now, to be fair, commercial revenue has helped transform the game. Modern broadcasting deals have funded development programs worldwide. Prize money has increased. Infrastructure has improved. Women's football has received greater investment. Many positive developments are tied directly to football's economic growth. FIFA would argue that commercial success allows football to expand globally. Again, that's a reasonable argument. But supporters often measure football differently. Fans tend to judge football by atmosphere, accessibility, and culture. And those metrics can produce very different conclusions. Because a tournament can become financially larger while feeling culturally smaller. The irony is difficult to ignore. The World Cup generates extraordinary global interest. Yet many lifelong supporters increasingly worry about whether they can physically participate in it. And that concern leads us to another layer of the story. Who creates the atmosphere that makes the World Cup valuable in the first place? Broadcasters sell images of packed stadiums. Sponsors associate themselves with emotional moments. FIFA promotes scenes of celebration and unity. But those moments don't appear automatically. They are created by supporters. The songs, the flags, the traditions, the traveling fans, the communities that form around matches. In many ways, supporters are not simply consumers of the World Cup. They are part of the product itself. Without them, the tournament becomes something fundamentally different. That's why reactions have become stronger whenever supporters feel overlooked. Because fans increasingly view themselves as stakeholders rather than customers. And once people see themselves that way, they start asking harder questions. Questions about ticket allocation. Questions about hospitality packages. Questions about accessibility. Questions about whether football's most important tournament still prioritizes football supporters. And this isn't happening in isolation. It's part of a broader trend across the sport. Look around modern football. Premier League ticket prices. European away travel costs. Major tournament expenses. Supporters across multiple countries are expressing similar concerns. The specific details vary. The underlying message often doesn't. Football may be growing, but many supporters fear they're becoming less central to the experience. If you're enjoying the documentary so far, leave a like. Because the next part of the story explains why FIFA may have underestimated the emotional side of this debate. The mistake wasn't necessarily financial. It was cultural. Football supporters don't simply buy a product. They inherit traditions. A supporter may attend matches because their parents attended matches. Their grandparents attended matches. Entire identities become attached to football culture. When people feel those traditions are threatened, reactions become much stronger than FIFA's economic models might predict. Because football isn't behaving like a normal entertainment industry. A concert attendee might choose a different artist next year. A football supporter rarely changes teams. The emotional attachment runs deeper. That means decisions affecting accessibility carry consequences beyond simple consumer dissatisfaction. They touch identity, community, belonging. And that's why some of the criticism aimed at FIFA feels unusually passionate. Supporters aren't merely debating logistics. They're debating the future character of the World Cup itself. Will it remain a tournament shaped primarily by football culture? Or will it increasingly resemble a global entertainment event optimized around revenue, tourism, and corporate partnerships? Notice something important. Those goals are not necessarily incompatible. A World Cup can generate revenue and maintain atmosphere. It can attract sponsors and remain accessible. It can expand globally while preserving supporter culture. The challenge is balance. And balance becomes harder as the scale increases. The bigger the tournament becomes, the greater the pressure to maximize revenue streams. The greater the logistical complexity. The greater the risk of distancing supporters from the center of the experience. And that's where FIFA faces a genuine dilemma. Because many of the organization's objectives are understandable. More countries want inclusion. More broadcasters want content. More sponsors want exposure. More governments want hosting opportunities. Everyone wants a larger piece of football's biggest event. But supporters are asking whether endless growth has limits. Not financial limits. Cultural limits. At what point does expansion begin changing the very thing people love? That question may define the next decade of international football. Especially because World Cup 2026 isn't just another tournament. It's a test. A test of whether football can become larger without becoming less personal. A test of whether supporters can remain central in an increasingly globalized industry. A test of whether FIFA's vision of growth aligns with what fans actually value. And if the tournament succeeds, FIFA will point to packed stadiums, global audiences, and unprecedented participation. If it struggles to connect emotionally with supporters, a different conversation will emerge. One about whether football's leaders have misunderstood what creates value in the first place. Because value in football isn't only measured in revenue. It's measured in memories. And memories are created by people. The people who travel. The people who save. The people who fill stadiums. The people who turn matches into experiences. The people who care. As we move closer to 2026, that's the real story worth watching. Not simply who wins the World Cup, but whether the tournament can still feel like it belongs to the supporters who made it special. So here's the question. Do you think FIFA is successfully growing the World Cup for the future, or do you think football risks losing something important along the way? Let us know in the comments. Because regardless of where you stand, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. Fans are no longer quietly accepting every decision made above them. They're asking questions. And FIFA is discovering just how powerful those questions can become. The World Cup has always been football's greatest stage. The question is whether the people in charge remember who built the audience.